Right now, somewhere in your kitchen, there's a little container of salt. Maybe it's a shaker. Maybe it's a box. Maybe it's a bag of pink Himalayan salt that cost way too much. But you don't think much about it, right? It's just salt. The stuff you throw on fries when they're a little bland. But let me tell you something crazy. Salt, this tiny white crystal, is one of the most important substances in all of human history. Entire cities were built on it. Empires fought wars over it. Religions gave it sacred meaning, and revolutions were sparked because of it. It's no exaggeration to say that salt shaped the world as we know it. Today, we take it completely for granted. You can walk into any store, grab a big box of salt for less than $1, and walk out. But for thousands of years, salt was wealth. It was power. And in many ways, it was survival itself. So, welcome to episode 1 of Fall Asleep to History, the story of salt. This is the story of salt, the rock that built civilizations. To really understand just how valuable salt was, we need to start with money. Because, believe it or not, for a long time, salt was money. The word salary actually comes from the Latin word salarium. Roman soldiers, some of the toughest warriors in history, were partly paid in salt. Salt wasn't just a flavor enhancer. It was essential to life, essential to armies, essential to survival. Without salt, your body literally cannot function. Muscles, nerves, even your brain, all depend on it. Now picture yourself as a Roman soldier marching 20 miles a day under the hot sun, carrying heavy armor. You're sweating buckets, and with every drop of sweat, your body is losing salt. Without replenishing it, you'd collapse. No salt, no army, no empire. This is why Roman generals understood something powerful. If you wanted an empire, you needed salt. Soldiers could eat salted meat that lasted weeks, salted fish that traveled across the sea. Salt kept armies alive and marching. And it wasn't just Rome. Across Africa, great caravans crossed the Sahara Desert with camels loaded not with gold, but with salt. One of the most famous trading cities in history, Timbuktu, became wealthy not because of its gold mines, but because it sat at the crossroads of the salt for gold trade. In fact, in the 12th century, salt was literally worth its weight in gold. Think about that for a second. These little white crystals, as valuable as gold. That's why historians sometimes call salt white gold. Here's a fun way to picture it. If you walked into a market in medieval Mali with this little vial of gold dust, and I walked in with this pile of salt, we could have done a straight up trade. That's how valuable it was. Gold made you rich, but salt kept you alive. Salt didn't just buy survival, it bought influence. Whole trade routes were carved out just to move salt from where it was plentiful to where it was desperately needed. In fact, the word salary isn't the only phrase we owe to salt. You've heard the saying, worth his salt. That comes directly from this period. A good worker, a good soldier, someone who earned their keep, they were literally worth their salt. And if you weren't, well, you were just plain salty. Salt didn't just buy soldiers. It built cities. When you trace the history of some of the richest, most important cities in the world, you find one thing in common: salt. Entire urban centers rose, thrived, and sometimes fell, all because of the demand for salt. Take Venice, for example. Today, Venice is famous for its canals, gondolas, and art. But before it was a glittering center of trade and Renaissance culture, Venice was essentially a swampy lagoon. Why build there? Why would anyone want to live in a watery marshland filled with mosquitoes? The answer, once again, is salt. In its earliest days, the people of Venice harvested salt from the surrounding lagoons. They set up salt pens, shallow pools where seawater evaporated, leaving behind precious crystals. That salt was valuable enough to trade, and Venice became a hub. Eventually, the city grew rich not just on salt, but on everything salt allowed them to trade. Venice's shipping empire, its dominance in Mediterranean commerce, its golden palaces, all of it can be traced back to piles of simple white crystals harvested from the sea. Venice is just one example. Head north into the Alps of Austria, and you find another city with salt at its very core, Salzburg. The name literally means salt fortress. Long before Mozart was born there, long before it became famous for music and culture, Salzburg was a strategic hub of the salt trade. For centuries, salt mined from the nearby Alps flowed through Salzburg and made it rich. That salt financed cathedrals, castles, and the kind of wealth that allowed the arts to flourish. Without salt, Salzburg would never have become Salzburg. Germany has its own salt city, Lunenburg. In medieval times, Lunenburg's salt mines were so productive that they fueled the entire Hanseatic League, a powerful trading confederation that dominated Northern Europe. The salt extracted there didn't just feed the local economy. It traveled to Scandinavia, to the Baltic, to cities that relied on salted fish as their staple food. Without Lunenburg's salt, the diets and trade of Northern Europe would have been drastically different. And then there's China. Salt has been so central to Chinese history that some historians argue it was the backbone of imperial finance. Dynasties literally rose and fell on the ability to control salt. The state ran monopolies on salt production, extracting enormous wealth from the population. With that wealth, emperors built armies, funded expansion, and kept control. Salt was so important that in some periods, more tax revenue came from salt than from land or agriculture. Think about that for a second. The government's greatest source of power was not farms or gold, but salt. In Africa, too, salt created entire centers of wealth. The city of Tagaza in the Sahara Desert was nothing but huts made of salt blocks. No trees, no water, no fertile soil, just salt. And yet caravans of camels crossed hundreds of miles of desert to reach it. Why? Because in West Africa, salt was as valuable as gold. In fact, West African empires like Mali became rich precisely because they controlled both salt mines and the gold trade. The exchange between gold and salt wasn't a minor detail, it was the foundation of global commerce in the region. Salt determined not just where cities thrived, but how people lived within them. Salt storage and distribution shaped markets and marketplaces. Even the design of some city quarters was influenced by salt warehouses and the need to guard them. Think of it this way. Whenever you see an old European port city or a medieval trading town, ask yourself, where's the salt? You'll usually find it at the heart of things. So many of the places we admire today, Venice, Salzburg, Lunenburg, Timbuktu, owe their existence not to kings or conquest, but to the constant human demand for salt. People needed it so badly that they built entire urban civilizations around it. Salt wasn't just seasoning, it was survival, it was stability, and it was wealth. Salt is, in a sense, the invisible architect of human geography. If salt built cities and financed empires, it also shaped the way people thought about life itself. Salt wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. For thousands of years, people across the world have treated salt as sacred, magical, or even divine. Think about it. Salt is mysterious. It comes from the sea, or it appears like crystals hidden in the earth. It preserves life by keeping food edible, but too much of it can destroy life. It heals wounds, yet it can also sting like fire. It is both ordinary and extraordinary. And because of that, it has been wrapped in symbolism from the very earliest religions. Let's start with the Bible. Salt appears again and again in both the Old and New Testaments. In the book of Leviticus, God commands that every offering made on the altar must be seasoned with salt. It wasn't enough to sacrifice an animal or grain. You had to add salt, the symbol of purity and permanence. In the book of Numbers, the phrase covenant of salt is used to mean an everlasting covenant, something eternal and unbreakable. When Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew tells his disciples, "You are the salt of the earth," he's not just saying they're useful, he's telling them they are essential, precious, and fundamental to life itself. Salt in the Bible is not a garnish, it's a symbol of the divine covenant, of purity, of endurance. In Hinduism, salt also plays an important role. Offerings of salt are made in certain rituals. Salt is used to banish evil spirits and purify homes. In some Hindu funeral rites, salt is placed near the body to symbolize the impermanence of life and the purification of the soul. It's simple, but powerful. Salt stands for both life and death, for preservation and release. In Islam, salt is also significant. The Prophet Muhammad is said to have begun and ended meals with a pinch of salt. This was not only for the flavor, but for its purifying and healing properties. In many Muslim traditions, breaking a fast with bread and salt is a symbol of humility and gratitude. Even today, in some cultures influenced by Islam, it's considered an act of friendship and blessing to share salt at the beginning of a meal. Across Asia, salt takes on additional meanings. In Japanese Shinto tradition, salt is used to purify spaces and ward off evil. If you've ever seen a sumo match, you've probably noticed the wrestlers throwing handfuls of salt into the ring. That's not just for show, it's an ancient purification ritual intended to cleanse the space of bad spirits before the contest. Outside restaurants in Japan, small piles of salt are sometimes placed at the entrance, a tradition called morigio. It's meant to invite good fortune and drive away negativity. Even in Europe, salt has long carried superstitions. One of the oldest and most famous comes from the simple act of spilling salt. If you spill salt at the table, tradition says it's bad luck. But why? Some trace it back to the Last Supper, as depicted in Leonardo da Vinci's famous painting. In it, Judas, the disciple who would betray Jesus, is shown with an overturned salt cellar at his elbow. Salt, the symbol of purity and loyalty, spilled by the one who betrayed. From that moment on, spilling salt became linked to betrayal, bad luck, and danger. So, what do you do if you spill it? You toss a pinch over your left shoulder. Why the left? Because, according to superstition, the devil lurks there, whispering temptations. By throwing salt in his face, you blind him and drive him away. Even people who don't consider themselves superstitious sometimes do this reflexively. It's one of those habits buried deep in cultural memory, passed down through centuries. Salt also appears in folk traditions around the world. In Slavic countries, when a guest of honor arrives, they're welcomed with bread and salt. It's not just hospitality, it's a blessing. Bread symbolizes life, and salt symbolizes enduring friendship. Together, they mean, may our relationship be lasting and full. In Russia in particular, the tradition of offering bread and salt to visitors is still alive, a warm and meaningful gesture. In parts of Africa, salt is used in rituals to protect against curses and to honor ancestors. In ancient Egypt, salt was part of the embalming process, a symbol of preservation not only of the body, but of the spirit. Salt kept the dead intact for the journey into the afterlife. There's also the idea of salt as a boundary marker between the sacred and the profane. In medieval Europe, some people believed you could keep witches and evil spirits away by sprinkling salt at your door or on your threshold. Sailors carried salt with them as protection against storms and misfortune at sea. Even farmers used it ritually, scattering it in the field to bless the crops. So, salt isn't just seasoning, it's a bridge between the material and the spiritual. It marks covenants, purifies spaces, protects homes, and heals bodies. It symbolizes loyalty, permanence, blessing, and sometimes even betrayal. When we see salt in religious and cultural traditions, what we're really seeing is humanity's recognition of its power. Salt preserves life, and so it naturally became a symbol for everything people wanted to preserve: faith, family, friendship, loyalty, purity. And here's the amazing thing. Even though these traditions come from completely different corners of the world, ancient Israel, India, Japan, Europe, they all arrive at the same conclusion: salt is sacred. It's essential. It's more than a mineral. It's a connection between people and the divine. When you pick up a salt shaker today, you're not just holding seasoning. You're holding thousands of years of ritual, symbolism, and belief. Every grain is a reminder that for most of human history, salt was never ordinary. It was extraordinary. Salt wasn't just a spiritual symbol or a building block of cities. It was power. And when something holds that much power, people fight over it. The history of salt is filled with conflict, struggle, and rebellion. Wars were fought for it, empires were funded by it, and revolutions were sparked in anger against it. Let's begin in France. By the 14th century, the French monarchy had discovered one of the most reliable ways to squeeze money out of its people: a tax on salt. It was called the gabelle. Now, this wasn't just any ordinary tax, it was deeply unfair. People in different regions paid different rates, and some were exempt altogether. In some areas, the tax made salt so expensive that ordinary people could barely afford it. And remember, salt wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. Without it, food spoiled. Without it, diets lacked essential minerals. Every family, rich or poor, needed it. So when the government taxed salt, It wasn't just taking money, it was taking survival. The gabelle became one of the most hated taxes in French history. Smuggling salt, called faux sonnage, became rampant. Thousands of people were arrested, imprisoned, or even executed for breaking the salt laws. Imagine that, being put to death not for murder or treason, but for carrying a sack of untaxed salt. By the 18th century, resentment toward the gabelle had become a burning symbol of royal oppression. And when the French Revolution exploded in 1789, the salt tax was one of the grievances fueling the fury. Now, let's move to India, centuries later. When the British ruled India, they imposed their own monopoly on salt. Indians were forbidden from collecting or selling it independently. Everyone had to buy salt from the British at inflated prices. This hit especially hard because India is a hot country where salt is essential for health. Even the poorest farmers and laborers needed it. Yet they were forced to pay a foreign empire for the right to survive. In 1930, one man decided to fight back, not with guns, but with salt. His name, of course, was Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi understood the symbolic power of salt. It was simple. It was universal. Everyone needed it. So he launched the famous Salt March. For 24 days, Gandhi and his followers walked over 200 miles to the sea. There he bent down, scooped up a lump of salt, and broke the law. That simple act electrified India. It wasn't just about salt, it was about independence, dignity, and resistance to colonial rule. The British arrested more than 60,000 people, but the movement could not be stopped. The Salt March became one of the turning points in India's struggle for freedom. Salt rebellions didn't only happen in France and India. In the Italian city-states of the Middle Ages, rivalries and wars often centered around salt trade routes. Venice and Genoa, two powerful maritime republics, clashed again and again in wars fueled by control of salt commerce. Whoever controlled the salt controlled wealth. Even in the United States, salt played a role in war. During the American Civil War, salt was desperately needed to preserve meat for soldiers. The Union Army targeted Confederate salt works, destroying them to weaken the South's ability to feed its troops. Without salt, an army simply could not march. Soldiers could be brave, disciplined, and well-armed, but if their food spoiled, they starved. In fact, shortages of salt contributed to hunger and hardship across the Confederacy. Some historians argue that salt shortages directly weakened the Southern war effort. Salt has even shaped borders. In Africa, salt mines were so valuable that tribes and kingdoms fought for generations over their control. In Ethiopia, blocks of salt known as amyl were used as money well into the 20th century. Whoever held the mines held power.
What makes these conflicts so fascinating is that they weren't just about an abstract resource like land or trade. They were about a substance so basic, so necessary, that people could not live without it. You can live without gold. You can live without silk. You can live without spices. But you cannot live without salt. That gave salt a unique kind of leverage in human history. Think again about Gandhi. When he chose salt as the symbol of defiance, it wasn't by accident. He didn't choose something obscure or complicated. He chose the one thing that united rich and poor alike. Salt was life, and to deny people salt was to deny them dignity. That's why scooping up a handful of salt became an act of revolution. From medieval smugglers in France to colonial resistors in India, from naval battles in the Mediterranean to scorched salt works in the American South, the story is the same. Control of salt meant control of people. And when that control became too heady, people rose up. They fought. They revolted. Salt is, in many ways, history's quiet spark of rebellion. It wasn't always the headline, but it was there, shaping the struggles of ordinary people. When you trace the revolutions of the past, you don't just find speeches and battles, you find salt. And that's the paradox. Something so small, so humble, became the foundation for some of the loudest cries for justice in human history. When we talk about the importance of salt, it's easy to focus on money, trade, and taxes. But none of those things would matter if salt didn't do one simple, miraculous thing. It preserves. Long before refrigerators, freezers, and modern packaging, salt was humanity's greatest weapon against decay. Imagine life before refrigeration. You've hunted an animal or you've harvested fish from the sea. You have a few days, maybe less, before the meat spoils. In a hot climate, food can rot within hours. Without a way to preserve it, your options are limited. Eat it all immediately or watch it waste away. But with salt, you can stop time. Salt draws out moisture. Bacteria, the little organisms that cause food to spoil, can't survive without water. When you cover meat or fish in salt or soak it in brine, you create an environment where bacteria struggle to live. The result? Meat that lasts weeks, fish that can be carried on long voyages, vegetables that can be stored through the winter. Salt isn't just a seasoning, it's survival in crystalline form. The ancient Egyptians understood this thousands of years ago. Salt wasn't just for food, it was for the dead. They used a form of salt called natron in their embalming process. Bodies were packed with it to dry them out to preserve them for eternity. Mummies that are thousands of years old owe their preservation to salt. For Egyptians, salt wasn't just life-giving, it was a pathway to the afterlife. Across the Mediterranean, salt became the foundation of entire cuisines. The Romans were masters of salt preservation. They didn't just eat fresh fish. They made garum, a fermented fish sauce preserved with salt that became a staple condiment across the empire. Think of it as the ketchup of the ancient world. Without salt, there is no garum. And without garum, Roman dining would look very different. In Northern Europe, salted herring and cod were staples for centuries. Herring was so important that it became known as the silver of the sea. Entire economies were built around catching, salting, and selling herring. Cod, preserved with heavy salting, became the backbone of diets in places like Portugal, Spain, and Scandinavia. Even today, salted cod dishes, bacalhau in Portugal, bacalhau in Spain, are national treasures. But originally, this wasn't about gourmet dining. It was about necessity. Salted fish was durable, portable, and reliable. It kept sailors alive on voyages across the Atlantic and into new worlds. Without it, exploration would have been impossible. Think about the Vikings. We imagine them as fierce warriors in dragon-headed ships, raiding and exploring. But what allowed them to travel such great distances wasn't just their ships, it was their food supply. Salted and dried fish gave them the fuel they needed to sail to Iceland, Greenland, and even North America. Salt, quietly, was the wind in their sails. Even agriculture was shaped by salt preservation.
farmers with livestock needed ways to store meat for the winter months. Salting pork or beef allowed families to survive when fresh food wasn't available. The rhythms of farming, hunting, and fishing were all tied to the cycles of salting and storing food. Pickling is another legacy of salt. Vegetables stored in brine could last for months. Sauerkraut, kimchi, pickles, all of these traditional foods are not just about taste, they are about preservation. Salt gave humanity the power to eat vegetables out of season, to survive harsh winters, to travel with provisions, and to create flavors that became cultural icons. And let's not forget cheese. Cheese is, in essence, milk preserved with salt and fermentation. Salt slows down spoilage, shapes flavor, and allows cheese to be stored and transported. Without salt, there is no Parmesan, no cheddar, no feta, no Roquefort. The history of dairy is inseparable from salt. This ability to preserve food wasn't just convenience, it was revolution. Salt meant armies could march farther, sailors could explore longer, and cities could grow larger without starving. Before salt preservation, people were tethered to immediate sources of food. With it, humanity could break free of those limits. Salt is, in many ways, the foundation of global expansion. Consider the age of exploration. Spanish and Portuguese ships sailing to the Americas needed reliable provisions. Salted cod and salted beef were essential cargo. Without them, long voyages would have been impossible. Salt preserved not only food, but the dreams of empire. Salted provisions helped connect continents, for better or worse. And it wasn't just about survival, it was about taste. Salt preservation created entirely new cuisines. Think of Italian prosciutto, French saucisson, Spanish jamon. These iconic foods began as practical ways to preserve meat. Over centuries, they evolved into delicacies. What started as necessity became culture. Salt even influenced religion through preservation. Many fasting traditions around the world allowed salted fish or preserved vegetables when fresh meat was forbidden. This shaped diets in Catholic Europe, in Orthodox Christianity, and beyond. Salted fish wasn't just convenient, it became tied to spiritual practice. At its core, the story of salt and preservation is the story of human ingenuity. Faced with the problem of time and decay, people found a way to cheat nature. With a handful of salt, they could extend the life of food, cross oceans, feed armies, and survive winters. When you bite into a slice of cured ham, or taste a pickle, or enjoy a piece of cheese, you're tasting history. You're tasting survival. You're tasting humanity's oldest fight against time itself, and salt is the weapon that made victory possible. Salt is one of those substances that looks simple at first glance, just tiny white crystals scattered across your table. But behind that simplicity lies a universe of science. Salt has shaped not only our diets and our cities, but also our understanding of chemistry, medicine, and even the human body. At its most basic, salt is sodium chloride, NaCl. Two elements, sodium and chlorine, bonded together. Separately, these elements are dangerous. Sodium is a soft, silvery metal that reacts violently with water, bursting into flame. Chlorine is a toxic green gas, once used as a chemical weapon. But put them together and you get something stable, edible, even essential. It's one of nature's paradoxes. Two deadly substances combining to create life's necessity. Salt isn't just important to humans, it's important to all life. Every cell in your body depends on salt. Sodium and chlorine ions regulate the flow of fluids, maintain blood pressure, and enable your nerves to transmit signals. Every thought you think, every muscle you move, every heartbeat you feel, these are powered, in part, by salt. Without it, your body would literally stop working. That's why cravings for salt run so deep. They're not just cultural, they're biological. Salt is also the reason sweat tastes salty, and tears too. Your body constantly circulates sodium and chloride through fluids. Lose too much salt through sweat, say after running a marathon or working in extreme heat, and you risk dehydration, cramps, even death. Historically, in hot climates, people learned to replenish salt as carefully as water. Soldiers marching under the desert sun, workers in tropical fields, sailors at sea, all depended on salt to survive. Medicine has long relied on salt. Saline solution, a simple mixture of salt and water, is one of the most common treatments in hospitals. It hydrates patients, cleans wounds, and restores electrolyte balance. When you get an IV drip, there's a good chance it's just salt water flowing into your veins. That simple solution has saved millions of lives. In the past, doctors experimented with salt in surprising ways. Salt was once prescribed for stomach troubles, sore throats, even infections. Ancient healers knew that salt could help cleanse and disinfect. They may not have understood the chemistry, but they observed its effects. Even today, we gargle salt water for sore throats, soak in saline baths for skin conditions, and use salt-based rinses for nasal congestion. Beyond medicine, salt has shaped science itself. In the 17th and 18th centuries, chemists studying salt helped unlock the mysteries of elements and compounds. Salt crystals became objects of fascination. Their regular cubic structure hinted at deeper patterns in nature. When scientists peered through early microscopes, they saw in salts not chaos, but order. That discovery of regular, repeating structures paved the way for crystallography, the study of crystals, which in turn influenced modern chemistry, physics, and even the discovery of DNA's double helix centuries later. Geology, too, is shaped by salt. Beneath the Earth's surface, vast deposits of salts lie hidden. These salt beds were formed millions of years ago when ancient seas evaporated and left behind layers of crystallized minerals. Today, salt domes, massive underground formations, play a crucial role in energy. Oil and natural gas often collect around salt domes, making them targets for drilling. In this way, salt has guided not just human history, but the energy industries that power our modern world. Salt has also shaped technology. In the early days of industry, salt was essential in chemical processes. It was used to make glass, to cure hides into leather, to produce soap, and even to create chlorine and caustic soda, both critical for industrial chemistry. Without salt, the Industrial Revolution would have looked very different. Factories needed it as much as kitchens did. And then there's gunpowder, one of the most transformative inventions in human history. Gunpowder is made of 3 ingredients: sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter. While saltpeter is not the same as table salt, the very word salt reminds us of how essential these crystalline compounds were to the progress of science and technology. Salt, whether sodium chloride or potassium nitrate, was at the root of explosions that changed warfare forever. Salt even teaches us about space. Astronomers and planetary scientists study salt deposits on Mars and other celestial bodies as clues to the existence of water, and possibly life. If you find salt, you know water once existed, and where there's water, there may be the conditions for life. Salt, in this sense, is not just a terrestrial story, it's cosmic. Think also about taste science. Why does salt make food taste so good? Part of the answer lies in biology. Salt enhances flavor by suppressing bitterness and amplifying sweetness. That's why a sprinkle of salt can make chocolate taste richer, or why salted caramel is so irresistible. Our tongues are hardwired to crave the balance that salt provides. What chefs discovered through experience, science confirms in the lab. Salt is the master key of flavor. In a way, salt is both the oldest and the most modern of substances. Ancient people used it without understanding why it worked. Today, scientists can explain its chemistry down to the atom. But whether in a hospital IV, a lab experiment, or a gourmet kitchen, salt remains as vital as ever. When you hold a grain of salt between your fingers, you're not just holding seasoning. You're holding a compound that runs through your veins, that powers your nerves, that shaped our industries, that helped reveal the secrets of life itself. Salt is not just history. Salt is science. It connects the body, the earth, and the cosmos in ways so profound that something so small becomes infinitely large. Salt has been with humanity since the beginning. It shaped our cities, our empires, our wars, our religions, our diets, and our science. But what about now? In the age of refrigeration, global shipping, and endless food options, does salt still matter? The answer is yes, more than ever. It might not decide the fate of empires anymore, but it is still deeply embedded in our culture, our health, and our imagination. Walk into any modern kitchen and you'll see salt within arm's reach. But it's not just salt anymore. It's an entire world of salts. There's Himalayan pink salt, harvested from ancient deposits in Pakistan, marketed as pure and mystical. There's fleur de sel, hand-harvested from French salt marshes, prized for its delicate crystals. There's black lava salt from Hawaii, smoked salts, flake salts, artisanal sea salts from every corner of the globe. Salt, once a crude block traded across deserts, is now a gourmet product, celebrated in cookbooks and sprinkled with ceremony. Celebrity chefs talk about salt the way poets once talked about wine. They debate the grain size, the crunch, the mineral notes. Some salts dissolve instantly, others linger on the tongue. In a sense, salt has gone full circle, from being essential for survival to being overlooked in modern abundance, to becoming a luxury once again, not for necessity, but for pleasure. At the same time, salt carries a darker reputation in the modern world. Doctors warn us about too much sodium in our diets. High salt intake is linked to hypertension, heart disease, and strokes. Public health campaigns urge people to cut back. Food companies quietly reduce the salt content of processed foods to avoid scrutiny. For the first time in history, humanity's problem is not getting enough salt. It's often getting too much. And yet, we crave it. Salt cravings are not just cultural, they're hardwired into our biology. Snack food companies know this. The crunch of chips, the allure of fries, the comfort of salted popcorn, all of these play directly into the deepest circuits of our brain. Salt is addictive in the most primal sense because our ancestors lived in a world where salt was scarce. Today, surrounded by abundance, our biology hasn't caught up. Salt remains irresistible. Beyond food and health, salt endures in language and symbolism. We still say someone is the salt of the earth to describe their honesty and worth. We talk about rubbing salt in the wound to describe added pain. To take something with a grain of salt is to treat it with skepticism. These phrases, born centuries ago, still season our conversations today. Salt also remains embedded in ritual. In Japan, sumo wrestlers scatter salt in the ring before a match to purify the space. In some cultures, throwing a pinch of salt over your shoulder wards off bad luck. In others, sharing bread and salt is a gesture of hospitality. Salt, the ancient preserver, still preserves meaning in our lives. Even geopolitically, salt has echoes today. Nations regulate salt iodization to prevent iodine deficiency, a once devastating public health problem. Salt remains an instrument of policy, not just taste. And salt production, whether mined deep underground, harvested from the sea, or manufactured industrially, remains a billion-dollar global industry. Then there's the artistry. Modern salt artists carve blocks of salt into sculptures, illuminate entire underground cathedrals made of salt rock, and create immersive experiences in salt caves, where people sit and breathe the mineral-rich air, believing it has healing powers. Whether scientific or symbolic, salt continues to inspire creativity. Even in digital culture, salt has found a strange new life. Online communities use the word salty to describe bitterness or frustration. The idea that salt represents human emotion, once linked to tears and sweat, now lives on
in memes and slang. The same word that describes sacred covenants thousands of years ago is now shorthand for someone being upset in a video game. Strange, but fitting. Salt adapts, just as it always has. Salt has been a mirror of human history. It has shown us our ingenuity, our greed, our faith, our science, and our taste. It has been treasure and tax, blessing and curse, weapon and medicine. Few other substances can claim to have influenced so many aspects of human life for so long. And in the end, perhaps salt's greatest legacy is this. It connects us across time. The Roman soldier receiving his salarium, the Egyptian embalmer preserving a body, the medieval trader in Timbuktu, the fisherman salting cod in Portugal, the Indian marcher following Gandhi to the sea. All of them touch the same crystals you sprinkle on your dinner today. Every grain of salt is a story of survival, of power, of culture, and though we may take it for granted now, salt is still as essential as it ever was. The empires may have vanished, the monopolies may have dissolved, but salt endures. Quiet, constant, eternal. The next time you left the shaker, pause for a moment.
Think of the caravans that crossed deserts, the wars that were fought, the prayers that were whispered, the lives that were preserved, all because of the tiny glittering crystals in your hand. Salt isn't just seasoning, it's history, it's humanity, it's us.